of Adventure. This is episode 207 with Rick Hanson. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide, Derek Loudermilk. You can check out the show notes for this episode at derekloudermilk.com and check out Superconductors, my book that is coming out July 3rd. Maybe you would like to pre-order a copy for yourself. Or 10. So let's get to today's episode. Rick Hanson is back on the show. It's been almost 3 years since he was on the show. Before first episode, he was talking about hardwiring happiness. He's a New York Times best-selling author of that book. And this is his fifth book that's coming out, which is Resilience. And we are not going to be talking about the whole breadth of resilience, but some very specific parts of his book and parts of the practice of growing resilience and growing the mental resources to build resilience. The first of which is learning. We're going to go quite deep into learning, which is a meta skill that enables you to acquire all of these other skills. So there's this process where you don't just have an experience where you're learning something, but you actually enrich and absorb the experience so that it fully changes your neural structure, changes your actual brain. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about the link between our biology of our brain and how that affects the way that we learn or the way that we experience the world. Rick is a big adventurer himself, a big wall rock climber, and we actually weave in this philosophy of adventure throughout the episode. In particular, how adventure helps us see things like a child, like a beginner, full of curiosity and awe and delight, and how important these ways of experiencing the world can be for our overall happiness and our overall resilience. Finally, we talk about motivation, which is so important for entrepreneurs. And often, lots of us know what we should be doing. We understand the steps, but find it hard to actually do them. And so motivation and connecting with the reason why we want an outcome, what are the benefits that it's going to give us, are so important. And so we really get into motivation, which is part of the core of actually getting shit done as an entrepreneur. All right, and there's so much more good stuff in this episode. I won't keep you any longer from the meat of the matter. So here is Rick Hanson. Welcome back to The Art of Adventure, and returning guest Rick Hanson is on the show today. Welcome back to the show, Rick.
Derek, it's truly, really a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited. We got to catch up a little bit before the recording, and we haven't talked much since our last interview, which was 3 years ago, but I still consider you to be one of my mentors. And so it's really a privilege to have you back on. And I'm really, I'm excited about your new book, which we're going to talk about, Resilient.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool that you wrote it with your son, and I was listening to some of the podcast episodes that you're doing with him.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did that come about? How did you start working together?
Oh, that's nice. Well, I knew that I wanted to do this book, which is based on my online Foundations of Wellbeing program. And that online program has been shockingly popular to me. And I say shocking in a good way. I just was really surprised. I think over 13,000 people have done it. And I think what made it so popular and effective was that it's very experiential. So I wanted to create a book that was a very experiential way to grow inner strengths of different kinds, like mindfulness and compassion, grit and gratitude. And so I thought to myself, I'm pretty busy. I need someone to help me with this. And I, of course, immediately thought of our son, who is a great writer. He has a background in social media, and he's also deeply engaged with experiential learning related to music and dance. And so it seemed like the perfect combination. Plus, how cool, how fun was that?
Yeah,
So
wow.
As it turned out, it makes me think back on the psychedelic days where the saying was, you ate it, you write it, right? So I wondered how it would turn out to commit to writing a book with my son. And as it turned out, it was great. He was very patient. He, I think, demonstrated a lot of resilient well-being, which is the focus of the book, resilient well-being, in his dealings with me. And hopefully I wasn't too much of a jerk as a dad. And we ended up writing it together, and it's coming out the week of March 26th, 2018, as you know.
Brilliant. And that's, yeah, I think, about when this episode is going to come out. So that's our plan, is to have this come out when the week of the book. So if you're listening to this, it's in the near future. And so I love the topic of resilience, because when people try to do big challenging adventures or big life projects, there's so many points at which people can fall off and not complete or drop out or go home or whatever. And it seems like resilience is that overarching way that keeps people going and allows them to really accomplish, the big things in life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, are any of these chapters more important, do you think, or any of the components of resilience more important to an entrepreneur or to an adventurer?
It's very interesting. Well, I think that resilience, as you say, is what we draw upon inside ourselves that helps us recover from the worst day of our life or survive it. But also resilience is what we need day to day. Like you just had a young child. That's one of the major stressors for people and demands on resilience. And often you can see that a person who has not developed a lot of resilience, when the challenges in their life go up, including the challenge of a new child, or if there's a relationship, because you can scale resilience at different levels. So, for example, you can talk about resilience at the level of the body, the mind, or a relationship, or even a resilient family, community, or country. And if a couple is not very resilient, you drop a child into that relationship, and it can sometimes blow the relationship apart. Maybe it takes a year or 5 before the real explosion to fully unfold, but it's because the glue that held that couple together wasn't strong enough. They weren't resilient enough. They weren't able to, maybe they were too brittle. Everything was fine as long as they stayed inside a very small comfort zone. And there's nothing like a baby or a toddler or a teenager, I speak from experience, to push you out of your comfort zone. So to be resilient, I think it requires 12 key inner strengths, and each one of those is a chapter in the book. And it starts with compassion and moves to mindfulness. Then, frankly, I think it moves to the most important inner strength of all, which is the strength that we draw upon to grow the other strengths, which is to say the strength of learning. And it's interesting, Derek, lately I've been reflecting on my life. I'm in my mid-60s, and I've been kind of looking back. And honestly, when I look back, especially to my mid-teens, which was a major turning point in my life, a critically important thing happened, which is that I just got it in myself that the best thing I could do to get out of the sucky life I was in the middle of and to stop being such a dork and so shy around other people and so awkward, right? And so unhappy inside, I realized the best thing I could do for myself would be to learn how to grow in general, because then I could apply that general skill to any particular thing I wanted to grow inside myself, like growing self-confidence or growing patience or growing knowing how to talk to girls or growing how to deal with my parents, right? Those are the things I could grow in myself. And so if I were to offer one thing in particular for entrepreneurs and people in general, it would be, much as Carol Dweck talks about with her growth mindset material, to really approach life as an opportunity for growth, but then to go beyond merely the growth mindset, which is just sort of an attitude, to actually being more skillful inside your own mind so that you can help the benefits of what you're experiencing to really land inside you. So increasingly, they're woven into the fabric of your nervous system, and you can take, you can take them with you then wherever you go.
Yeah, learning, especially given the increasing rate of change, sort of how quickly things are accelerating, is, whether that's learning how to use the newest iPhone or with adventurers learning how to navigate a new culture, language, etc. I've seen over and over again how that ability to bring yourself up to at least an acceptable state of functioning as fast as possible is so helpful.
Yeah, totally true.
And, we've had people on the show before that talk about, learning a language or learning a skill. What is I know you talk about activation and installation as the parts of learning. Could you briefly describe sort of your approach to learning as a meta skill?
Yeah. So let's say you're going through your day, and inside yourself, you look inside and maybe you feel okay, maybe you don't feel so okay. And you look inside and you see, oh, I wish I were happier. Or, oh, I wish I were more confident. Or, oh, I wish I were more motivated. Or I wish I felt more cared about. Or I wish I were more skillful with running a meeting or building a business. So the question then becomes, how do we grow those psychological resources inside ourselves, those capabilities, those understandings, those attitudes, or those mood in general? How do we shift our mood in the direction of happiness, inner peace, contentment, and love? How do we actually do that, right? Seems like a freaking fundamental question. Or to put it in a different kind of way, how do we reverse engineer enlightenment? I'm like you. I'm very interested in the upper reaches of human potential. The people who just in their examples seem to have such charisma and capability, and they're just clearly really tapped into something quite profound. What's going on? How do they do that, right? So we think immediately about, okay, I wish I had more of this or that inside myself. What's in your wallet, right? Well, what's in your heart? What's in your mind? What's in your outlook? So these are the things we want to grow. So then the question is, how do we grow? How do you grow gratitude? How do you grow courage? How do you grow a spirit of adventure inside yourself? The fundamental neuropsychology of learning has two necessary and sufficient steps. The first step is we have to experience whatever we want to grow. You want to become more mindful? You must have more experiences of mindfulness. If you want to become more compassionate or happier or grittier, you must have experiences of compassion, happiness, patience, or grit. First one. But second step, we have to turn those experiences into a lasting change in our body, especially in our brain. The hardware has to change. Otherwise, there's a momentarily pleasant or useful experience, but there's no lasting value. There's no takeaway. All that money is left on the table, right? And so to me, those are the two fundamental steps. And people routinely forget the second one. It's right under our nose. We're already having a good idea. We're already realizing a better way to talk to our wife or husband or child. We're already feeling a moment of relaxation or reassurance or calm or radical inner peace, perhaps. We're already feeling it. Maybe we're having a moment, as you and I were talking earlier, of awestruck gratitude. It's already happening. And then when people routinely do, and I do it myself out of habit, Derek, is we skitter on to the next thing before the current good thing has enough time to start getting consolidated into neural networks as a lasting change of structure or function. And that, therefore, to me, to finish, is the great opportunity. Yeah, it's good to have juicier, nicer, more fun experiences. Great. But we're already really good at that, generally speaking. What people usually are poor at, and coaches and therapists and human resources teachers and educators tend to be poor at it as well, is to help people take the experiences they're already having and then maximize the lasting neurological change that results from them. And what my book's about and my work in general is about getting good at getting good, right? Getting better at getting better so that you know how to grow. And then you can apply that to growing these 12 critically important inner strengths, which then are inside you. And no matter how much the world is falling apart around you, or what other people are doing, or who's in the White House, or who knows what, you carry inside you these resources that you can tap into whenever you want.
I think most people probably assume that simply having the experience, simply being mindful or going through the experience will be enough to sort of get it in there.
And it's not. It's so interesting. I mean, one of the great dirty little secrets, and I'm a long-time psychotherapist, and I think I'm a clinical psychologist. Being a psychotherapist or a related field like a coach is a noble profession. But the therapists and coaches routinely make the mistake of assuming that experiencing equals learning. No, learning is a physical change in your brain. New connections need to be forged between existing neurons. New baby neurons need to be born. There need to be changes in the ebbs and flows of neurotransmitter systems like dopamine or natural opioids. Physical things have to happen. And they happen quickly and automatically for negative experiences like stress or irritation, resentment, or worry. But these physical changes in the brain don't naturally happen very efficiently for positive experiences unless they're million-dollar moments. I've known a number of people who've had big adventures. I've done a lot of rock climbing. I've done a lot of wilderness things. And people will go out and they'll have extraordinary experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And yet they'll come back and 2 weeks later, they'll still be as stressed. They'll revert to their baseline. They'll still be as stressed, irritable, frustrated, bored, grumpy, impatient, insensitive, uncaring as ever. And to me, that's very, very poignant. It's very poignant. And it creates a fundamental problem as well, culturally, because it leaves us feeling hungry inside, always chasing the next experience, always chasing the next shiny object, rather than taking into ourselves and filling ourselves up from the inside out. So then we can meet the next moment feeling already contented, already loved and loving, already at peace. And that makes all the difference in the world. How do we meet the next moment? Do we meet it with what feels like something missing inside or a kind of fragility? Or do we meet the next moment feeling already full?
So let's say you do a big rock climb, you do have one big adventure in your year, and you want to learn as much as possible, sort of going beyond the end of the experience. How do we do that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think first of all, that's such a right question, isn't it? And second, it's really interesting that we're not taught how to do this in grade school. But the essence is really simple. I summarize it, as you know, in this acronym HEAL, H-E-A-L, which really summarizes the fundamental neuropsychology of learning in a very practical way. So the first stage of learning is the activation phase, where you're actually having an experience. Mm-hmm. There's some state of being. And then in the second phase of learning, we convert that state of being to a trait hardwired into ourselves. So that's the fundamental two-stage process of learning. And so in the HEAL acronym, the H stands for have the experience in the first place, either because you notice it or because you create it. And then E stands for enrich, where we make the experience big. And A stands for absorb, in which we increase the sensitivity of the nervous system to the experience it's representing. So the nervous system is more readily changed by it. And then the optional fourth step is linking, in which we're aware of both positive and negative. In the first 3 steps, we're only aware of something beneficial, usually enjoyable, not always, but usually enjoyable, something beneficial, like a moment of insight or a moment of gratitude, or let's say you're having that adventure, rock climbing, kayaking, whatever it is you're doing. As you're having that experience, you're helping it sink in. So the real essence of this, I'll just summarize the whole business and shut up. It really is 3 things. When you're having the experience, stay with it for a breath or 2 or 3. So there you are rock climbing, and you have a sense of your own fortitude, your own capability, or you're having a sense of your own capacity to manage serious threats, dangerous, hazardous situations. But internally, you're feeling resourceful and capable. And even though you're kind of anxious, you're holding on to something half the width of a pencil. You don't want to fall, but you're all right, fundamentally. When you're having that experience, slow down for a breath or 2 to register it. Just appreciate it. Take it in, stay with it. So there's a famous saying in neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So the longer they fire together, the more they wire together. Marinate in the experience. Stay with it. That's the first thing. The second thing, feel it in your body. So there you are. Maybe I speak from experience. There you're rock climbing, and you make it up to your next point of protection. You drop a little piece of metal, a nut, it's called, into the crack, and then you clip in, and whoof. Now if you fall, you're only going to fall a foot rather than 20 feet. Whoof. In that moment, maybe intellectually, okay, I made the clip. I'm safe. But you don't feel anything. It's really important to let yourself feel it. Open to it in your body. Embodied learning, that's much more consequential for learning. It leaves much more of a trace. Feel it in your body. That's the second major way to steepen your growth curve as you go through your day. And the third major way is to focus on what's enjoyable. What's rewarding about the experience? What's pleasurable about it or meaningful about it? Because that will increase the activity of 2 neurotransmitters in your brain, dopamine and norepinephrine, which will flag the experience as a keeper into long-term storage. There are other things you could do as well to heighten the beneficial impact, the lasting learning from the experiences you're having. But those 3 are really easy to remember. They're natural to us. Stay with the experience 5, 10, 20, 30 seconds in a row. Try to feel it as much as possible in your body and focus on what's rewarding about it. And that's going to tend to naturally hardwire its residues into your brain.
So it sounds like there's, if we're racing from experience to experience, first we would need to just slow down to sort of embody it and appreciate it more and focus on these things. So does it make sense to just sort of like reduce our number of experiences and just try to appreciate each one more?
That's very interesting. That's very insightful. I don't think it makes sense to try to reduce the number of experiences. It's more like focus on and stay with the useful experiences, and that itself will tend to crowd out the worthless, if not harmful ones.
And the other thing I'm wondering is, how do we milk the experience that we had a year ago and like keep learning from the same thing? Can we simply do remember the experience and do all these steps again, even though it was in the past?
Yeah. This is a great question, in part because it's the exact right kind of question. We're focused here on how to grow, and most people don't pay much attention to how to grow. So to myself, thinking about an adventure you had last year is a way to create an experience in your mind in the first of the 2 stages of the learning process. So you're like, right now, I'll do it. I'm bringing up to mind a climb I did in Yosemite National Park. And so now that I've done that, I'm having an experience. But just because I'm having that experience doesn't mean it's having any value. And now what I'm doing is deliberately doing the 3 things I described. I'm staying with the experience. I'm imagining what it was like to climb up that big dihedral with my two friends and how capable I felt. And I'm staying with it. Second, I'm kind of feeling it in my body. I'm not just imagining it, I'm feeling it. As I basically lay backed up a 100-foot flake sticking out and did it, I'm feeling in my body quite capably. And then I'm also bringing to mind what was so fun about it and pleasurable and felt kind of inspiring. And I was so grateful for Mother Nature. And thank you, Yosemite Valley, and thank you, granite, and thank you, sunshine, and thank you, stars that exploded so that atoms bigger than helium could emerge so that there actually are rocks and so forth. Woohoo! It's that second stage, that's the installation stage. Activation is good. That's where we, let's say, reminisce about an experience. But if you want to get the benefit of reminiscing about past experiences, you can't just activate it as a memory. You need to, again, install it as an experience in yourself. That's how you change yourself more and more over time.
And now I'm thinking that, there is in physical training the benefit of visualizing doing the thing you want perfectly, which gives you added strength gains without having to lift the weights, or added precision gains in like archery or something like that. Is that the same sort of neurological phenomenon that's happening here?
Yeah, it's an example of the category of things I'm talking about. So to be clear, when you hear me talk about how to help yourself grow as much as possible or gain as rapidly as possible, to be a rapid learner, to have a steep curve of growth or performance improvement, that's what we're talking about here. As you hear us discuss that, you'll realize that a lot of what we're talking about, you've already heard one place or another, or you were doing it intuitively yourself. So to be clear, I'm not claiming that I've invented the multiple learning factors that exist inside the mind that we can tap into to steepen our personal growth curve. What I have tried to do is systematically bring them together and apply them to growing particular things. So in that context then, if somebody is doing mental rehearsal, including anticipatory rehearsal, so imagining, let's say, pulling the bow back perfectly, releasing it perfectly, or in my case, let's say, imagining doing a rock climb before I actually do it. And then when I do it, I'm much more dialed in, that's a very effective way to keep the experience going and embody it. And often implicit in that is a sense of reward, because you're seeing yourself, you're imagining yourself in rehearsal, anticipatory rehearsal, doing it well.
And for example, like remembering people's names, I've heard of linking, when you sort of try to add as many different ways to remember their name that might help you trigger. Is the linking you're talking about the same?
No, that's interesting. So yeah, it is an effective memory technique to imagine different images that associate with something you're trying to remember, like a person's name. But the linking I'm describing, I'll give you an example. Let's suppose that someone is an entrepreneur, or they're in life in general, and they know they want to do something, but they're nervous about it. Maybe they're nervous about asking for a raise, or asking someone to marry them, or they're nervous about starting a new business, or going public with their blog, posting it actually, and letting other people see what they're writing about, or their photographs. All right, normal kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So in this example, we have the quote unquote negative material of, let's say, self-doubt or anxiety. With linking, we would be aware of both the negative material and something positive that's matched to it. So for example, if a person had self-doubt, gratitude is nice, but it's not well matched to self-doubt. It's irrelevant, basically, to self-doubt.
Okay.
What would be matched to self-doubt would be to recall a handful or more of times in your past when you had a challenge and you succeeded at it. That would be matched. So, for example, you might be aware of off to the side these feelings of self-doubt and the kind of the ideas or beliefs of self-doubt off to the side of awareness. But in the foreground of awareness, you would bring to mind one thing after another that you were initially nervous about, but then you pushed forward and you succeeded at it, for example. Or maybe in the foreground of awareness, you might bring to mind the feeling of being with people, your friends, your family, your partner, people in your past, perhaps, teachers or mentors who believe in you. You would bring to mind in the foreground of awareness the feeling of this, of being cared about and respected and endorsed by these people. Well, since, to use the saying again, neurons that fire together wire together, if you're aware of two things at once, they're going to naturally associate. And so if you're aware of negative material off to the side, while the positive material is big and intense and living color in the foreground of awareness, it will gradually soothe and ease and replace that negative material. This is a very powerful method. It's implicit in a lot of therapy, including trauma therapy, and a person can do it themselves if they're skillful about it. If you get hijacked by the negative, just drop it and focus only on the positive resource, which is a natural antidote for the negative or compensation for the negative. But on your own, I've used this method a lot myself to heal, feelings of insecurity or inadequacy rooted in my own childhood.
It's interesting. I think I arrived at a similar method, which is the way I looked at it was like a logical or a legal sort of proof. Like, let's examine the facts of all the times when I succeeded or when people supported me or whatever, in order to have sort of an irrefutable body of evidence that I will be able to succeed in the future, or that, at least a handful of people love me. And not sort of, and I like basing it in facts rather than just sort of like nebulous positive thinking, I guess.
I think that's a classic method. A lot of cognitive therapy involves linking at the conceptual level. So people might have a belief, let's say, about not being capable or able to do something, or nobody would really want to date me, or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And then what they then do is they dispute it, ideally with 3 or more credible rebuttals that they really believe in. That's effective. That's an effective method. On the other hand, as a lot of research shows, cognitive methods often are superficial. And I want to be clear, they can be very effective, but what tends to really be an important element to add on to them really is the behavioral aspect, where you make yourself act in new ways. So that's why they call it cognitive behavioral therapy. But in addition to cognitive behavioral methods, it's really important to bring in more emotional and somatic aspects. So, for example, in the example you're using here, in addition to the idea of people who support you, rationally, to rational rebuttals, there's totally a place for that. Deep down inside ourselves, we're very emotional beings. Mm-hmm. And the deeper evolutionary layers of the 600 million year development of the nervous system and the brain, those deeper layers are nonverbal, they're non-conceptual, they're not abstract, they're very much in the present moment, and they're somatic and emotional. And so addressing those somatic and emotional layers makes sense in terms of the evolution of the brain. And it also makes sense in that the somatic and emotional aspects are often more intense. So it's one thing to know intellectually, a lot of people like me. Fine. But, to feel liked, to feel, what's it like to feel loved? And to kind of marinate in that, that's a very powerful antidote to self-doubt.
And that'd be more about, I think that the term you use would be embodying the sort of, if you had like a list of people that had loved you, then you could also feel the way that they love you? Would that be how you
Yeah,
would do it?
that would be a way to put it. Yeah, that's right. They've loved you. Like I could do it right now. I can bring to mind just like, oh yeah, it doesn't have much impact because it's just intellectual. It's interesting, like in the history of psychotherapy, which is about 100 years old now, 120 or so years old, pretty much grounded in Freud and psychoanalysis. And a woman therapist, Frida Fromm-Reichmann, in the 40s, I think, after psychoanalysis had been around for 30 or 40 years, in a very gentle but blunt way, she said, the patient, the client, does not need a new idea. The client needs a new experience. And I think for a lot of people, they focus on getting a new idea. Okay, there's a place for new ideas, but most fundamentally, we need new experiences. And then in particular, to my point, we need to internalize those new experiences so they actually have a lasting impact on us.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I encounter over and over again is people have the right ideas. They're well informed, sort of know what they should be doing, and sometimes they take action and achieve it, and sometimes their own stories or negative thought patterns or whatever it is like, and it gets in the way, and they just don't even start. They know it's a great idea, they're motivated, but they don't start. So I'm wondering, well, is that within the scope of resilience, or perhaps you could just speak to how to think about addressing that?
Yeah. Oh, I think of the 12 strengths, motivation is one of the 12. And you could say, kind of implicit in what you're getting at, is this idea that, in a way, the key to life is helping yourself learn to want what's good for you that you don't naturally want, right? How do you help yourself be motivated? And so one of the chapters in the book definitely is about motivation. And what's really useful to appreciate is that you can hack your brain, in effect. You can train it to naturally be inclined toward what's helpful by, before you do what you want to motivate, and maybe what you want to motivate is to not do something. Like you want to motivate yourself to quit flaring in anger at your teenager or your partner or your coworker, let's say.
Yep.
Or you want to help yourself stop with one cookie and don't have 10 cookies.
Yes.
For example, whatever it is you want to motivate yourself toward, it's very useful before doing it. Imagine in an emotional way how rewarding it will be to you to do whatever you want to motivate. So, for example, I need to exercise. I don't particularly care for just grinding away for half an hour on my treadmill, but I need to do it. So I'll imagine before I do it that I get to read, I'll listen to rock and roll, I'll feel good in my body. Yeah. And the point, though, is that, in effect, it's affective imagination, emotional imagination, somatic imagination. It's not just merely conceptual or imagistic, conceptual being like, oh, I know intellectually I'll enjoy listening to my music. That's really different from bringing up kind of a pleasurable sense of listening to the music. And the brain is a vast association machine. And it's like carrot, you want to put the carrot in front of the donkey. So it helps to imagine very sensually what the reward will be before you do something. It's a key technique right out of behaviorism. It's very effective. And then while you're doing something you want to motivate yourself toward, keep focusing again and again and again on what's rewarding about it while being aware of what you're doing. Same thing in your imagination. Don't just imagine, oh, it'll be nice to listen to music, but imagine how much you'll enjoy listening to music while imagining yourself on the treadmill or whatever it is you want to motivate. You really want to pair, you want to associate that which you want to motivate with anticipated reward, because that's how the brain works. It wants that dopamine, it wants that reward. And then after you do it, third, reflect on what was rewarding about it. You feel good, it went well, felt good in your body, etc. So those three ways, before doing it, while doing it, and after doing it, are incredibly powerful ways to shape yourself. And I find that a lot of people know what they ought to do, but they don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
There's a joke in therapy world. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. Right? So you and I are talking here about absolutely one of the most fundamental questions. How do we help ourselves be the light bulb who really wants to fill in the blank, exercise, or stop at just one cookie? Right? Or take a big breath and pursue that PhD program?
I found when I was writing superconductors that I couldn't rely on simply willpower to force myself to sit down and write. I had to keep coming back and connecting with, why the heck am I bothering to spend years and so many hours putting this thing together? Most of it was like, okay, what do I hope is going to happen with the benefits of writing a book? And then I was like, okay, all these good things are going to come of it. It's like, all right, let's go down and sit the butt in the chair and make the words appear.
Yeah, that's right. One thing I want to say to you personally, Derek, about adventure is that one of the great things about having adventures is that they blow our mind open to possibility, and they help us relate to our life in a way that is not so habitual and dull, but in fact give us a feeling for the extraordinariness of a human life and everything we can experience. And, adventure really varies. Like, I love the wild and crazy adventures I've had, but how many people really, like right now I'm reading, I think it's Hell or High Water. It's an account of kayaking down this incredibly intense river gorge in Tibet. Yeah. And I'm not going to have any more adventures like that one. Exactly. On the other hand, I can sit in my backyard and look out at the hills and have a sense of awe and childlike wonder. And that's an adventure for me in a lot of ways,
It's really cool. There's a ton of bugs here in Bali. It's just it seems to be the jungle has lots of bugs. And right outside where I'm recording this, I have a garden. And the other day I was coaching, and a little pouch hatched 1,000 baby praying mantises, and I'd never seen anything like that before. And so I was trying to like get a time-lapse video while still concentrate on the coaching. But I was really pleased to find that when I shared it with friends, when I put it on Facebook, lots of other people were experiencing awe of this phenomenon as well, which I got a great kick out of, because normally these types of things I would sort of like bring my son over and be like, look, isn't this cool? It's an experience that you've never had because you're a baby. But there's so many other people that have never had that experience that, hundreds of my friends got to experience awe at seeing baby praying mantises. And it's so simple. It's just bugs, doing their normal life cycle.
Yeah. Well, but it's so interesting. Like, I'll look at a little creature like that, or I'll see a spider, for example, let alone a bird in my garden or a fish in our pond in the backyard. And I'll wonder, what kind of experiences are they having? Like, you and I are having experiences. We're having pretty sophisticated ones, but we're hearing, we're seeing, we're tasting, we're touching. Most of our experiences are enabled by the same neural hardware that is in the nervous system of a crab, for example, or a goldfish, which means that most likely, much as we presume that dogs and cats and monkeys are having experiences of some kind, they feel pain, they feel pleasure.
Yeah.
Clearly they experience thirst. Clearly they experience lust. They seem to experience friendliness, at least dogs do. So then you kind of go down the ladder So those little baby praying mantises, do you ever imagine what kind of experience they were having? Elemental, they have visual systems, they're tracking shadow and light, they're detecting smells, they're getting internal feedback from where their little legs are moving and their bodies are going. I mean, they're having experiences too. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, to me, that's an adventure. It's an empathic adventure to imagine yourself into the very, very elemental mind of a praying mantis.
Wow, it's tough. It's tough to think about that without anthropomorphizing a little bit.
But I don't know if it's tough. Just think about elemental sense of pressure. Like as we exist right now, we're both seated, right?
Yes.
And so there's a sense of sensation or pressure, gravity on our tush. Well, the sensory systems that enable in us a very elemental sense of pressure or heat or cold or pain or pleasure, the neural hardware that enables that software is present in a praying mantis.
That makes me definitely feel...
Maybe teeny weeny little worms are zombies.
Yeah.
But I don't think a crab is a zombie. I know squirrels are not zombies.
It makes me feel more connected to simpler animals.
Yeah.
For sure. Knowing that there's such similarity.
Flip the other way. As with mindfulness, look inside our own minds. You could start to recognize that your mind, your experience moment to moment is like a symphony. Okay, so it's a coherent piece of music in effect unfolding, or a symphony, yeah. And yet with both the benefit of a third person perspective that helps you understand more how the hardware works, and also the benefit of an internal first person perspective that's able to peer kind of closely into your own stream of consciousness. It's a little bit like deconstructing the symphony that you're listening to, and to be able to identify the elements of the orchestra that are producing their portion of the symphony passing by. And so when you look inside yourself, you start to recognize, wow, the most fundamental aspects of my experience, sensory experience especially, or very elemental emotional states like disgust or relief, those melodies in the symphony of my experience are being produced by very, very primitive instruments, little modules in my nervous system, in my brainstem and subcortex, or in my distributed nervous system throughout my whole body. Those instruments are producing that aspect of my experience in the moment. It's crazy to kind of realize that. It really takes you into, for me, a kind of profundity, actually, which is for me extremely adventuresome, to appreciate how contingent and arbitrary our experience is, and how much it's produced by the twists and turns of 600 million years of evolution of the nervous system, and the ways in which the results of that are really embedded in us today. The great neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp had this saying that the mind is like a great museum. It's a vast museum. And as we go kind of down or back in it, we go back in time. Anyway, so all this, helps me have a sense of adventurous wonder when I imagine just seeing those little baby praying mantises bubble out of that little pocket.
Well, what's sticking with me is, I think I don't, and maybe a lot of other people don't, think about their experience in terms of like what their body is generating, the different like physical components. Because I think a lot of us are in our minds, and we think like, oh, this is just me and my experience, but there's a physical body component of it that we're sort of not aware of most of the time.
Yeah. And, like just the background sense of going on being, or imagine when we first wake up, if you could rewind the movie. I don't know if this is interesting, but I find it really
Oh yeah.
interesting. So you imagine the first 5 seconds of wakefulness after you wake up, and verbal thought has not yet really come online, right? You're not chattering away. There's a dawning sense of sensation. Let's say you're in your bed, and you're locating yourself, and maybe your eyes start to open, and you're picking up light versus shadow. It's very elemental,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, that's like the ongoing consciousness of a sea slug or a lizard or a frog. It's pretty basic, pretty elemental, and yet you're conscious, right? Or imagine someone who's had a lot of brain damage, or they're dementing. They've lost language, they've lost memory, they don't know who they are. They're still conscious, and they're still experiencing emotion, hopefully positive emotion,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're sitting there in the wheelchair just drooling. And I can speak from some experience, having spent some time in those settings because of my family. So that kind of consciousness is being produced by hardware that we share with other creatures.
It's fascinating. Mm.
I'll tell you a funny story. Maybe this
Yeah,
will
yeah.
finish it up. I don't know. So I was having an adventure, and there are many kinds of adventures. So my adventure was that I was climbing with two friends of mine in El Dorado Canyon in
Colorado.
near Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
Yep. And we were doing a route that was, in terms of climbing grades, it was kind of basic 510. So it was quite challenging. That's a pretty stiff grade. And we were on the last pitch. I was the belayer. And so my friends had gone above me, and I was standing there on basically a little tiny ledge that was about 18 inches wide and about a foot deep, and clipped to, a couple of bolts in the granite wall.
Yes.
And if I leaned over my shoulder and spit, my spit would drop 500 feet to the ground. It was
Wow.
very sheer, very exposed. And my friends and I had all, of course, the best climbing gear, super duper high tech rope and sticky rubber shoes. And we were all just smoking hot. We were just amazing, right? And then here's my point. So I'm saying all this to a point. Suddenly I noticed right in front of me, crawling over these tiny little quartz crystals, maybe a couple millimeters long. Typically, a big one would be like a whole centimeter long, a little bit of quartz crystal sticking out of the, matrix of the rock, this sort of metamorphosized sandstone, essentially. Anyway, I saw right in front of me this black ant, about half an inch long. And with its 6 legs, moving in unison, being regulated by a nervous system of one kind, it was crawling over these big crystals that were, like, for it, enormous overhangs. And to scale, it was climbing over the rocks at a 515 grade. It was doing stuff that was impossible, that would have been impossible for my friends or me to do at the same scale. And yet, that ant was functioning in a way that the best scientists at MIT, at the time at least, this was about 20, 30 years ago, could not make a robot that could do that. We probably still could not create a robot that could autonomously be as effective at its scale as that little black ant crawling up the mountain with no rope, no sticky rubber climbing shoes, no belay, and yet perfectly comfortable in its world. And there were a couple takeaways from that for me. One was humility. Wow. With all my grandiose high-tech shoes and skillfulness and training and master of the universe, this ant was a better climber than my friends and me by far. And second, it took me into awe that that little creature, who was, in my view, having experiences of a rudimentary sort, was able to operate and function in that way with a profoundly simple nervous system. Wow. That was an adventure.
Yeah.
I was having an adventure climbing there. I was having an adventure of the imagination, imagining my way into the mind of an ant. I was having an adventure of humble gratitude. There are many kinds of adventures.
What that also brings up for me is that you were pretty close to the skill level of that ant, even though the ant was, so naturally meant to climb up things. And
it had 4 more legs than I did, so I'll give it that, or at least 2 more appendages than I did, but still, it was good at what it did.
And as humans, we can climb, we can fly, we can dive, and we're not as good as the perfectly adapted organisms, but we can go and experience all of those things, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. I know.
Wow. So much fun.
It's cool.
Yeah, this is great. So the new book is Resilient. It comes out March 26th.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And first of all, I just want to acknowledge you for taking this hour, and we didn't cover the entire book by any means, but like really
that's for sure
explaining and understanding what we were talking about. And I think you do a really good job of that in general, in your interviews and your books, of making sense of all of these different things that are at play, and just sort of like, okay, now I actually understand how I can use that. So I just want to acknowledge you for making it useful for people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny, in my own background, I don't have so I worked for a mathematician for a year one time. And one of the coolest jobs I ever had, I was 26, 7, and we were doing probabilistic risk analyses of things like the odds of a nuclear power plant melting down, or the likely cost of a huge tar sands project in Canada.
Yeah.
My boss was a progressive guy and so forth. I am myself. And what we were trying to do is, help things be safe and appropriate and whatnot. But one of the things that really struck me was that my boss, who had a PhD in mathematics from Princeton, he was a serious dude, a very capable guy. I was just the numbers cruncher in the basement who carried his briefcase kind of guy. Anyway, he said, Rick, a real mathematician is someone who wakes up every morning and wonders, what is a number actually? Right? And there you have right there that attitude of don't know mind, beginner's mind, the spirit of adventure applied to your own profession. And in the same way, I've learned again and again that people don't really understand something until they can explain it directly and simply. And for me, it's always been very important to kind of penetrate to the heart of the matter. Maybe it's the Scorpio aspects of my horoscope chart. I have no idea. But I've always wanted to really get to what's the essence, what's the heart of the matter, and then turn it into something valuable for other people. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this with you is that I really do think that spirit of not knowing, spirit of adventure, curiosity, investigation, wonder, delight, really helps us get to the heart of the matter and then turn it into something that's valuable for ourselves and others.
Brilliant. I'm going to steal some of that.
That's good. All right, you're welcome. I had a teacher a long time ago said, "Hey, we always steal from others. Steal the gold."
Good, yeah. Rick, what's the best place to find you and this new book?
Well, thank you. Best place is my website, rickhanson.net. And it's chock full of other freely offered resources. The book itself, I have to say, honestly, I came to fall in love with it. Initially, it was like a marriage of convenience. It's my 5th book. It seemed to make sense to write it. It summarizes a lot of really, really practical material for developing resilient well-being, which is absolutely, I think, fundamental. But over time, I came to appreciate what a beautiful little book it is. It's written from the heart. It's super concise. It gets right to the meat of the matter. And I'm very disclosed in it. I tell a lot of gory details about my personal journey of healing and growth. So I'm happy about the book, and I hope people like it. And I appreciate you letting people know about it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Rick. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Derek.
All right. Bye-bye. Wow, another great interview from Rick Hanson. I bet you didn't expect that we would talk so much about bugs in a podcast about resilience, but sometimes those interviews just follow the way that they need to go. every time I talk to Rick, something he says, one or many things that really open up my mind. And for this one, it's just being reminded of the link between our biology, who we are as organic beings, that influence the way that we operate in the world, the way that we have our experiences. And we think it's so unique to us, but really it's a product of the way that evolution has left us able to experience the world. And that's a huge advantage. Knowing our biology then allows us to use it in such a way to have better experiences, to be more resilient, to be more motivated, courageous, to learn better, all of these things. So check out his book, Resilience. It's pretty great. It's really a resource, a book that you can keep coming back to. And probably if you spent the full amount of effort utilizing each chapter, it might take you several months or a year to put in and practice every little thing. So it's a great book to have as a long-term resource guide that you can keep coming back to. And that is all for today's interview. So now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.